On a crisp spring morning in 2005, the residents of Burlington, Vermont, awoke to news that would shake their community. For years, the disappearance of 22-year-old Hannah Carlisle had been a haunting mystery. Hannah, a recent college graduate with dreams of becoming a social worker, had vanished one evening in March while returning home from her part-time job at a local bookstore. Her family, friends, and neighbors had spent months searching, putting up flyers, calling her phone repeatedly, and pleading for information that never came. The case had gone cold, leaving the Carlisle family in a state of limbo, unable to find closure. Law enforcement officers had initially combed the area, interviewed potential witnesses, and examined the evidence available at the time. But the trail had gone cold almost immediately. Hannah's parents, Margaret and Philip Carlisle, were left in a constant state of worry and fear. Her mother would often sit by the phone, hoping against hope that a call would come with news of her daughter. Philip found himself traveling to local neighborhoods, talking to anyone who might have seen Hannah that night, but the answers were always frustratingly elusive. Friends remembered Hannah as cheerful and compassionate, someone who would go out of her way to help others. She loved to volunteer at the local animal shelter and had plans to move into her own apartment near the university where she had studied. The idea that she could disappear without a trace seemed impossible. Yet the reality of the cold case was undeniable in the years that followed. The case file grew dusty in the Burlington Police Department. Investigators moved on to other pressing cases, though some officers kept Hannah's file on their desks, occasionally revisiting old leads. The Carlisle family continued to live with uncertainty, never stopping the search entirely but learning to cope with the absence of answers. Each holiday and birthday was marked with a sense of loss, a reminder of a daughter who had simply vanished. Community members occasionally spoke about Hannah, recalling her smile, her kindness, and her gentle nature, keeping her memory alive despite the pain of not knowing. It was in 2023, almost 18 years after Hannah disappeared, that new technology changed the course of the investigation. Advances in forensic science allowed cold case units to analyze DNA evidence more effectively, comparing it against databases that had expanded over the years. Officers in the Burlington Cold Case Unit reviewed every item of evidence, from the shoes she wore that night to the personal items collected from her apartment. They discovered traces of DNA on one piece of clothing that had never been fully analyzed due to the limitations of technology at the time. The breakthrough was unexpected but precise. It pointed to an individual who had previously been in the system for minor offenses but had never been linked to any violent crime. The detective team knew that verifying this lead could finally bring the Carlisle family the answers they had longed for. Detective Olivia Monroe, one of the lead investigators, worked tirelessly to build a case. She contacted the suspect, conducted interviews, and obtained a warrant to collect additional DNA samples. The process required careful attention to detail, ensuring that every step was legally sound and scientifically valid. Forensic analysts corroborated the findings, confirming a match that left little doubt about the suspect's involvement. When the detectives contacted Margaret and Philip Carlisle with the news, they were overwhelmed. Relief, grief, and disbelief washed over them simultaneously, a mixture of emotions they had not felt in nearly 2 decades. Finally, after years of unanswered questions, there was a clear path toward justice. The arrest of the suspect, a man named Thomas Reed, sent shockwaves through the community. Reed, now in his 40s, had lived in Burlington during the time of Hannah's disappearance and had moved away shortly after. He had maintained a low profile since, with neighbors remembering him as quiet and unassuming, never drawing suspicion. Yet the evidence against him was compelling, and the confession that would later follow confirmed the chilling reality of what had occurred. The community struggled to reconcile the quiet man they had known with the actions he had taken all those years ago. Local news outlets covered every development extensively, highlighting the persistence of law enforcement and the incredible advances in technology that had made the case solvable for the Carlisle family. The arrest marked the beginning of a new chapter. In private meetings with detectives and prosecutors, they learned the details of Hannah's final hours, the circumstances that had led to her disappearance, and the events that had remained hidden for nearly 2 decades. The information was painful, yet it also provided a sense of resolution. For Margaret and Philip, knowing the truth about what had happened was a form of closure, a way to begin the process of grieving fully and honestly. They could finally honor Hannah's memory without the persistent shadow of uncertainty. In the weeks leading up to the trial, community support for the Carlisle family grew. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers reached out to offer assistance, meals, and emotional encouragement. People attended vigils, shared memories of Hannah, and expressed relief that the case had been resolved. The collective empathy in Burlington underscored the impact of the crime not only on the family but on the broader community. It also served as a reminder of the importance of vigilance, care, and the willingness to assist law enforcement when possible, ensuring that every case received the attention it deserved. The trial itself became a meticulous examination of the evidence. Prosecutors presented DNA findings, witness testimonies, and Reed's eventual confession, painting a detailed picture of the events that led to Hannah's disappearance and death. Defense attorneys attempted to question the validity of the forensic techniques, yet the methodology had been thoroughly documented and supported by experts. Throughout the proceedings, Margaret and Philip sat together, holding hands, finding strength in each other while reliving painful memories. Friends and community members attended in large numbers, providing a visible reminder that Hannah's life mattered and that justice was being pursued diligently as the trial progressed. Forensic experts explained the significance of each piece of evidence, demonstrating how the combination of DNA, confession, and investigative work left no reasonable doubt about Reed's guilt. Jurors listened carefully to each presentation, understanding the timeline, the impact on the victim, and the systematic way in which the crime had been committed and concealed. The narrative was both harrowing and clear, illustrating not only the crime itself, but also the dedication required to bring it to light after so many years. For the Carlisle family, each day of the trial brought a mixture of emotions. Hearing the details was painful, yet it affirmed that they had finally arrived at the truth. Margaret often reflected on the years she had spent imagining different scenarios, hoping against hope that Hannah might still be found alive. Philip thought about the moments they had spent walking the neighborhoods, posting flyers, and pleading with anyone who might know something. The journey had been long, but now the truth stood unmistakably in front of them. A combination of sorrow and relief that words could scarcely capture. Community members also began to see the broader implications of the case. Law enforcement agencies emphasized the importance of preserving evidence, revisiting unsolved cases, and maintaining databases that could eventually provide answers years later. The Vermont Cold Case Unit became a model for other states, demonstrating how diligence, patience, and technology could converge to solve crimes that once seemed permanently beyond reach. Hannah's case illustrated the profound difference that determined investigators could make in the lives of families. who had long been denied closure, in the months following the arrest. The Carlisle family slowly began to rebuild. They attended counseling sessions to help process the trauma and loss, and they leaned on supportive friends and neighbors who had stood by them for years. While grief would always be part of their lives, knowing the truth allowed them to honor Hannah in a more complete way. They started small memorial projects, planting flowers in her favorite park and creating a scholarship in her name for students pursuing social work. Reflecting her passions and the life she had envisioned, Hannah's story became part of the community consciousness, a reminder of both tragedy and perseverance. Local organizations used her case to teach about safety, reporting suspicious behavior, and the value of community vigilance. Young people who had grown up hearing the story were encouraged to speak up when they witnessed concerning situations. The narrative of the Vermont 2005 cold case became not just a tale of loss, but also an example of resilience, advocacy, and the enduring pursuit of justice. Asterisk detectives continued to review other unsolved cases in Vermont. Inspired by the success of Hannah's case, they reached out to families, reassured them that time did not diminish the importance of their cases, and encouraged the collection of DNA and other evidence whenever possible. Hannah's case had shown that even after nearly 2 decades, justice could be served, and families could finally receive the answers they deserved. It became a beacon of hope for countless individuals still waiting for resolution. Asterisk, by the end of 2023, the Carlisle family had begun to experience moments of peace. The pain of Hannah's loss remained, yet the weight of uncertainty had lifted. They could visit her favorite places, remember her laughter, and share stories without the persistent ache of unanswered questions. Margaret and Philip knew that life would never be the same, but they also understood that the truth had given them the tools to rebuild, to celebrate Hannah's life, and to ensure that her legacy would endure in both the community and the hearts of those who loved her. The day of Thomas Reed's formal arraignment arrived quietly in Burlington. Though the courthouse was packed with reporters, community members, and those who had supported the Carlisle family for nearly 2 decades, Margaret and Philip arrived. Together, holding each other's hands tightly, bracing for the difficult moments ahead. For them, the journey had been long and harrowing, but now it was time to face the legal process that would hold Reed accountable. The Carlisle family had spent countless hours preparing themselves, mentally and emotionally, to hear the details of what had occurred, knowing that the trial would dredge up memories both painful and necessary. They knew that the legal system could be slow, but the confirmation that the man responsible was now in custody offered a sense of justice long denied. In the days leading up to the trial, detectives continued their work, meticulously reviewing every piece of evidence they had collected over the years. They compiled detailed timelines, organized witness statements, and prepared visual aids to make the case as clear as possible. Detective Olivia Munro spent long nights going over every detail, determined that nothing would be overlooked. She knew that the jury needed a full, unambiguous understanding of the sequence of events and the evidence tying Reed to Hannah Carlisle. The pressure was immense, but the opportunity to finally bring closure to a family who had waited so long made every late hour worthwhile. The trial began with opening statements from the prosecution, outlining the evidence that would demonstrate Reed's guilt. The narrative traced Hannah's last known movements, from leaving the bookstore on that cold March evening to the unexplained disappearance that followed. The prosecution described Reed's proximity to her apartment, his behavior in the days after the disappearance, and the eventual forensic breakthroughs that identified him as the suspect. Margaret and Philip listened in silence, their hands intertwined, absorbing the facts while trying to brace themselves for the testimony that would follow. Friends who had supported them over the years sat quietly, offering subtle gestures of comfort and reassurance. Witnesses were called to testify, including neighbors who recalled seeing Reed near Hannah's apartment on the night of her disappearance. Some spoke of minor, seemingly innocuous behaviors, while others remembered small, unusual actions that, in retrospect, seemed more significant. The prosecution used these testimonies to establish a pattern of behavior and proximity that connected Reed to the crime. For the Carlisle family, hearing these accounts was difficult but validating, confirming suspicions and fears that had haunted them for nearly 2 decades. They realized that even small details, overlooked at the time, were crucial pieces in the puzzle that had kept Hannah's case unresolved for so long. Forensic experts provided critical testimony about the DNA evidence that ultimately identified Reed. They explained the advanced techniques used to analyze the traces found on Hannah's clothing and personal belongings, clarifying how new technology allowed for matches that had previously been impossible. Margaret and Philip listened intently, fascinated and relieved by the precision of the science. The evidence left little room for doubt, reinforcing the significance of perseverance in cold cases. Each expert emphasized the rigor of the testing process, the chain of custody, and the careful methodology that ensured the results were both accurate and legally defensible. As the trial progressed, the prosecution introduced Reed's confession. Initially hesitant, Reed had provided detailed accounts of the events surrounding Hannah's disappearance. Once confronted with the overwhelming evidence, he described the moments leading up to her vanishing, the choices he made, and the ways he had concealed the crime for years. The confession was chilling in its detail, but crucial for the Carlisle family, who finally had clarity about what had happened. Listening to Reed's words, Margaret felt a mixture of sorrow, anger, and relief. The truth was painful, yet it was the first step toward complete closure. Throughout the proceedings, the courtroom atmosphere was heavy with emotion. Friends, neighbors, and family members of Hannah Carlisle attended every day, witnessing the painstaking unraveling of a crime that had remained hidden for far too long. Community members expressed gratitude to the Burlington Police Department and the Cold Case Unit for their dedication and persistence. Many remarked on the inspiring collaboration between investigators, forensic scientists, and prosecutors, noting how it ultimately allowed justice to be served. The case became a symbol of hope for other families still seeking answers, demonstrating that even decades-old mysteries could be resolved. The defense attempted to challenge the forensic evidence, questioning the validity of the techniques and the chain of custody. They raised objections to Reed's confession, suggesting coercion or misinterpretation. However, the prosecution countered every point with thorough documentation. Expert testimony and clear explanations of the procedures followed. The judge maintained careful control over the proceedings, ensuring that all arguments were presented fairly while keeping the focus on the overwhelming body of evidence. Margaret and Philip sat through these exchanges, absorbing every moment while clinging to the knowledge that the truth was now being fully recognized. Daily life for the Carlisle family outside the courtroom became a blend of coping and anticipation. Margaret focused on small routines to maintain a sense of normalcy, such as tending to her garden and keeping a journal of thoughts and memories about Hannah. Philip spent time connecting with old friends and colleagues who had offered support during the years of uncertainty. Together, they reflected on the journey they had undertaken, from the initial panic of Hannah's disappearance to the slow, painstaking years of hope and despair. The trial had reopened old wounds, but it also provided a tangible path toward healing, allowing them to process emotions they had long kept buried. As testimony continued, additional evidence was presented regarding Reed's life in Burlington during the time of the crime. Financial records, past addresses, and minor legal encounters all painted a picture of a man who had maintained a careful facade while concealing his actions. Investigators highlighted inconsistencies in his story over the years, demonstrating patterns that corroborated the confession and forensic findings. Each revelation further reinforced the narrative of accountability and the meticulous work that had gone into solving a case that many thought unsolvable. For the Carlisle family, the presentation of these details was both validating and excruciating, as they confronted the reality of someone they had once considered a member of their community being responsible for such harm. Outside the courthouse, the Burlington community remained engaged. Local newspapers ran in-depth articles, highlighting the persistence of investigators and the groundbreaking use of technology in cold case resolutions. Residents expressed relief and gratitude, many remembering Hannah as a bright young woman who had contributed to the town through volunteer work, kindness, and a strong sense of community. Memorials and vigils were organized, offering spaces for collective mourning and remembrance. These gatherings allowed community members to share stories, reflect on Hannah's impact, and support her family during a challenging time. The final weeks of the trial focused on closing arguments. Prosecutors emphasized the compelling combination of forensic evidence, witness testimony, and Reed's own confession. They reminded jurors of the emotional toll the crime had taken on the Carlisle family and the community, underscoring the importance of justice, not only for Hannah but for everyone affected by her disappearance. Defense attorneys reiterated their challenges to the evidence, but the weight of the case had already established a clear narrative. Margaret and Philip listened intently, hearts heavy yet fortified by the long-awaited confirmation that the system was finally recognizing the truth. When deliberations began, the Carlisle family waited with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The months of testimony, evidence, and emotional strain had built to this critical moment. Friends and supporters gathered nearby, offering quiet reassurance and shared hope. Every hour that passed was filled with tension, the outcome poised to mark the final chapter in a story that had dominated nearly 2 decades of their lives. For Margaret and Philip, it was a reminder of the resilience required to endure uncertainty, and the strength that comes from never giving up hope. The jury returned after careful consideration, and the verdict was read aloud. The courtroom fell silent as the words confirmed the guilt of Thomas Reed. Margaret and Philip felt a mixture of relief, sorrow, and validation. Years of uncertainty, fear, and grief were finally met with the recognition that justice had been served. The community erupted in a quiet but palpable sense of vindication, acknowledging the dedication of those who had pursued the case despite overwhelming odds. It was a moment that marked the end of a long chapter and the beginning of a path toward healing. In the weeks following the verdict, the Carlisle family focused on rebuilding their lives. They participated in counseling to help navigate the complex emotions of grief, anger, and relief. Community support remained strong, with neighbors and friends providing practical assistance and emotional encouragement. Memorial projects honoring Hannah grew, including scholarships, volunteer initiatives, and community events in her name. These actions allowed Margaret and Philip to transform their grief into meaningful remembrance, celebrating the life Hannah had lived and the positive influence she had on those around her. Detective Olivia Monroe continued to work on other cold cases, Inspired by the resolution of Hannah Carlisle's case, the successful application of DNA technology and persistent investigative work served as a model for colleagues across Vermont and neighboring states. Each solved case reinforced the principle that diligence, patience, and scientific advancement could converge to provide answers even after many years. Hannah's case became a cornerstone example, demonstrating that the truth could be found, and that families could finally experience the closure they deserved. By the end of 2023, the Carlisle family had found a fragile peace. The emotional burden of uncertainty had lifted, replaced by a mixture of grief and gratitude. They could visit Hannah's favorite places, share stories of her kindness, and honor her legacy in ways that felt both personal and communal. Though the pain of loss remained, the knowledge that justice had been achieved allowed them to move forward with their lives, carrying the memory of their daughter with renewed purpose and love. The weeks following the verdict were emotionally complex for Margaret and Philip Carlisle. The relief of justice being served was tempered by the reality of their daughter Hannah's absence, a loss that no court decision could fully erase. Every morning they awoke to a quiet house, reminded that years could not be reversed. Yet there was a sense of empowerment in knowing the truth. Margaret began keeping a daily journal, chronicling memories of Hannah and the emotional journey they had endured. It became both a therapeutic outlet and a way to preserve her daughter's story for future generations. Philip focused on reconnecting with old friends, rebuilding the social support that had frayed during years of anxiety and uncertainty. Together, they navigated grief in tandem, learning to carry it alongside the relief of closure. Community support remained a crucial part of their healing. Burlington residents organized memorial walks in Hannah's honor, raising awareness for missing persons and supporting families still searching for answers. Local schools invited Margaret and Philip to speak about resilience, the importance of hope, and the role of community in ensuring justice. For Margaret, these moments were bittersweet. They allowed her to honor Hannah's life and impact while confronting the collective grief that had touched the town. Philip noticed that engaging with the community helped him process his own emotions, transforming lingering anger into purposeful advocacy for other families. Detective Olivia Monroe continued to reflect on the case, knowing that Hannah Carlisle's story would stay with her for years. The investigation had been a defining experience, demonstrating the power of persistence, technology, and collaboration. She reviewed the records of the cold case unit, ensuring that every detail was documented, knowing future investigators might learn from their approach. Monroe also mentored younger detectives, sharing insights about interviewing witnesses years after events, managing complex evidence, and maintaining hope for resolution even in cases that seemed hopeless. Hannah's case became a teaching example, showing how diligence and care could transform a cold case into a story of justice. Meanwhile, Thomas Reed's life behind bars unfolded quietly but under constant scrutiny. Prison officials monitored him closely, aware of the severity of his crimes and the public attention surrounding the case. Reed had expressed little emotion following the trial, though in private sessions with psychologists he occasionally revealed regret, fear, and occasional attempts at rationalization. Analysts noted that while he was isolated, he remained a point of discussion in criminal justice circles, highlighting how past crimes could be uncovered through modern investigative methods and the importance of revisiting unresolved cases. Margaret and Philip also focused on practical matters, such as organizing Hannah's personal effects and documents. They found photographs, letters, and keepsakes that painted a vivid picture of her life, reminding them of the joy she had brought to family and friends. They carefully catalogued items, deciding to donate some to the local library and museum to preserve Hannah's legacy. Friends and neighbors assisted, sharing their own memories and photographs, which created a richer, communal remembrance of her life. Through these acts, the Carlisles transformed their grief into celebration, honoring the qualities that had made Hannah so cherished in her short life. The impact of the case extended beyond the Carlisle family. Local law enforcement used the successful resolution to encourage new initiatives in cold case investigations, emphasizing the importance of advanced DNA testing and interagency cooperation. Workshops and training programs were implemented across Vermont, with Monroe and her colleagues speaking at sessions to illustrate the process, the challenges, and the emotional weight of long unsolved crimes. The case became a model, demonstrating that persistence, combined with evolving technology, could achieve justice even after decades. Families still waiting for answers took hope from this, understanding that time did not necessarily eliminate the possibility of resolution. Therapy and counseling became central for the Carlisle family in the months that followed. They attended group sessions with other families affected by unresolved cases, sharing stories, emotions, and coping strategies. Margaret found solace in writing letters to Hannah, describing daily events, reflections, and hopes for how her daughter's legacy would continue to influence the community. Philip engaged more actively in advocacy, attending meetings to improve protocols for missing persons investigations. These efforts helped transform personal grief into constructive action, ensuring that their daughter's story would continue to impact others positively. As the first anniversary of the trial approached, Margaret and Philip decided to host a private memorial in Hannah's honor. Friends and family gathered at a local park where Hannah had spent time volunteering. They shared stories, read excerpts from her journal, and planted a small, flowering tree in her memory. Tears flowed freely, but there was also laughter and warmth, reflecting the love that had never diminished despite the years of pain. For Margaret, the ceremony was both a closure and a reminder that life, though altered, continued. Philip noted that the act of publicly honoring Hannah allowed him to integrate the experience of loss into a new rhythm of life, finding ways to carry her memory forward. The legal aftermath of Reed's conviction continued with formal sentencing. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he could not harm anyone else. The sentence brought a sense of finality for the Carlisle family, allowing them to close the legal chapter of the story and focus entirely on emotional healing. Media coverage emphasized the success of the cold case resolution, highlighting the importance of persistence and technological innovation in solving cases that had long defied explanation. While public attention gradually shifted, the community remained deeply aware of the impact Hannah's disappearance and eventual justice had on their town. Margaret and Philip also engaged in educational outreach, speaking to high school and college students about the dangers of complacency, the importance of vigilance, and the need to respect and protect those around them. They discussed their experiences without exposing unnecessary trauma, highlighting lessons about community support, the role of law enforcement, and the resilience required to endure uncertainty. Their message resonated, inspiring students to become more involved in their communities and to understand the complexities involved in ensuring safety and justice. Over time, the Carlisle family found ways to integrate Hannah's memory into everyday life. They created small rituals, such as setting a place for her at family gatherings and celebrating her birthday with charitable acts in her name. These gestures allowed them to keep her spirit alive while simultaneously moving forward. Friends and neighbors continued to check in, recognizing the delicate balance between remembrance and the need to continue living fully. Margaret began volunteering at local support centers for families of missing persons, offering guidance and empathy drawn from personal experience, while Philip contributed to investigative task forces seeking to improve cold case resolution procedures. The emotional legacy of the case also prompted reflection on the broader societal impact of unresolved crimes. Community leaders discussed policies for better reporting, timely investigation, and victim support. Taking lessons from the challenges faced by the Carlisle family, Burlington implemented programs to improve communication between law enforcement and families, emphasizing transparency and responsiveness. The success of Hannah's case became a benchmark, reminding everyone involved that perseverance, compassion, and modern investigative techniques could transform despair into justice. Years after the trial, Margaret and Philip continued to honor Hannah's memory in quiet, meaningful ways. They maintained a small foundation in her name, supporting educational initiatives and volunteer opportunities in Vermont. The foundation allowed them to create positive outcomes from tragedy, giving back to the community that had supported them during their darkest times. Each act of service, no matter how small, became a tribute to Hannah's life and the enduring impact she had on those around her. The story of Hannah Carlisle's disappearance, the decades of uncertainty, and the eventual resolution through DNA evidence remained a powerful reminder to families, investigators, and the broader public. It highlighted the need for patience, the significance of technological advancement, and the unwavering commitment of those who refuse to leave a case unresolved. For Margaret and Philip, the journey had transformed grief into purpose, sorrow into remembrance, and uncertainty into a hard-earned sense of closure. They continued to live with the memory of Hannah as a guiding presence, finding meaning in honoring her life, supporting others, and contributing to a community that had helped sustain them through nearly 20 years of waiting. Even as life slowly regained normal rhythms, the legacy of the case endured. Margaret often reflected on the long road they had traveled, acknowledging the resilience of the human spirit and the profound importance of truth. Philip found satisfaction in knowing that justice had been realized, that Hannah's story had not been forgotten, and that their perseverance had ensured the responsible party could not harm anyone else. Together, they faced the future with a cautious optimism, honoring the past while embracing the possibility of healing and hope. By the end of this chapter in their lives, the Carlisle family had come to understand that closure did not erase loss, but it provided a foundation upon which they could rebuild. Hannah's memory remained vivid, her story now complete in its truth. The community had witnessed the power of dedication, persistence, and compassion, learning that even decades-old tragedies could be confronted and resolved. For Vermont and the Carlisle family, the resolution of Hannah's case marked not an end, but a transformation, a painful yet vital step toward healing, remembrance, and the affirmation that justice, no matter how delayed, could still prevail.